Hello. Welcome back to Snugglewood, young Dreamlynx. My name is Arin. Snuggle down into your coziest quilt and let tonight's calming tale and soothing sounds relieve you of any worries and guide you towards a deep, restful night's sleep under these beautiful stars above. And so our story begins in a place called Snuggleton, and the sleepy giant tale of Jasmine Vine. Snuggleton rested in a cradle of rolling meadows, bordered by ancient stone walls that curved like the slow breath of the earth. Dawn light spread across the village in a warm embrace, while the nearby silver stream traced quiet melodies along its cobblestone lanes. The folk who lived there moved in harmony with the days, tending their plots with steady hands and open hearts. Yet what marked Snuggleton above all else were the scented climbers known as the Jasmine Vine, draping in thick cascades over every garden wall. These were no simple plants. Their leaves held a deep green richness that caught every shift of light, and their blooms opened in layers of creamy white and pale lavender, releasing a fragrance that wrapped around anyone who passed near. Legends told of an age when the sleepy giant, the great watcher of the land, strode across these meadows. His footsteps had shaped the soft swells of the hills, and his enormous hands had pressed the first seeds into the soil along the walls. The giant once carried a heavy weariness from endless travels, seeking a place where his thoughts could settle. In this very garden he paused, and the vines responded by winding upward, drawing in his calm until their very sap carried traces of that ancient rest. Seasons layered upon seasons, and the essence of the watcher fused with the climbers, so that now the walls stood as living reminders of renewal available to all who drew close. The garden walls formed a continuous path around the village, wide enough for slow wandering and lined with moss that cushioned every footfall. A young giant named Elara knew every bend of that path. She spent her days helping neighbours with their herb beds, yet her own thoughts often drifted like leaves in a current, never quite landing. Each evening she returned to the walls, tracing the vines with her fingertips. And in those moments, her breathing slowed and her shoulders eased without effort. On this particular twilight, when the sky softened into hues of rose and silver, Elara felt the pull stronger than usual. Villagers called good nights from their doorways, but she stepped onto the path anyway, letting the first section of wall draw her forward. Here, the jasmine vine grew thickest, its stems thick as wrists, twisting in elegant spirals around the stones. blooms clustered so densely that the air grew heavy with their perfume, a sweetness that reminded her of warm bread fresh from the oven and the laughter of little giant afternoons. As Alara walked, the leaves brushed her arms in a slow rhythm, each contact releasing another wave of scent that seemed to loosen the tight places behind her eyes and along her jaw. A small creature emerged from the foliage, a scentling no larger than her palm, its fur the colour of fresh cream and its whiskers trembling with curiosity. Scentlings lived only among these vines, their tiny paws gathering pollen that they carried from bloom to bloom, leaving trails of extra fragrance in their wake. This one paused on a leaf directly at eye level, regarding Alara with dark round eyes full of quiet welcome. She paused too, watching the creature groom its ears with delicate movements. The scentling's presence carried no demand, only an invitation to stand still and notice how the breeze moved through the trees overhead, creating a soft rustle like pages turning in an old storybook. Further along the wall, the path widened into the eastern alcove, where climbers formed natural arches overhead. Stone benches waited underneath, their surfaces worn smooth by years of use and covered in a velvet layer of moss. Alara chose one and sat, letting her palms rest on the cool stone. From this vantage, the village roofs appeared in miniature, their chimneys sending thin threads of smoke into the evening air. The jasmine vine here bloomed in large clusters, each flower unfurling petals that held tiny drops of dew, reflecting the last light. A pair of vine weavers scuttled along the stems, their bodies slender and patterned like bark, legs moving in perfect coordination as they adjusted the vine's grip on the stones. These creatures never cut or damaged, they simply encouraged growth, tucking stray tendrils into place with careful precision. Watching them, Alara felt her own thoughts begin to arrange themselves in order. No longer tangled, but flowing like the stream beyond the meadow. The path continued northward, where the wall met a small fountain carved from the same stone. Water trickled over rounded lips into a basin edged with the same climbers, their roots dipping into the moisture and drawing it upward to feed the blooms. The sound of the water was steady and low, a constant companion that matched the rhythm of a heartbeat at rest. Alara dipped her fingers into the basin, letting the coolness travel up her wrists. Around the fountain's edge lived clusters of petal whispers, with feathers that matched the exact shades of the jasmine vine. They perched on the water's edge, dipping their beaks to drink and then lifting their heads to release a series of soft notes that rose and fell like a lullaby passed down through generations. One petal whisper landed on the bench beside her, tilting its head as if to share a secret. Its song wove through the air, blending with the water and the rustle of leaves, until the three sounds became one continuous thread of comfort. Twilight deepened, yet the path remained easy to follow because the vines themselves seemed to hold a subtle inner light. Not bright, but enough to outline each stone. Elara rose and continued westward, where the wall curved around a hidden courtyard filled with low-growing herbs, whose leaves released their own gentle aromas when brushed. The jasmine vine draped here in long curtains, creating private rooms within the larger garden. In one such space stood a wooden swing suspended from a sturdy branch that had grown through the stones. Elara settled onto it, toes just touching the ground, and let the motion begin in a slow arc. The swing's ropes creaked softly, a familiar sound that carried memories of summer evenings spent in similar motion, when worries felt far away. From this vantage, she could see the distant hills, their shapes echoing the broad shoulders and resting form of the sleepy giant, who still watched over the land from his place in legend and cloud. A family of root whispers appeared at the base of the nearest wall, small beings with bodies of woven root and leaf, their eyes glowing like tiny lanterns. They moved with deliberate care, patting soil around the vine's base and whispering to one another in tones too low for words, yet full of encouragement. One root whisper looked up at Elara and raised a tiny hand in greeting, then returned to its task of ensuring the climbers had all they needed to thrive. The sight filled her with a warmth that spread from her chest outward, reminding her without words that care given freely returns in equal measure. The final stretch of the wall led southward, back toward the village gate. But the path here opened into a broad meadow where the jasmine vine spilled over the stones and continued along the ground in fragrant runners. Wild grasses mingled with the climbers, creating a carpet that cushioned each step. Elara walked slowly, each footfall sinking slightly into the earth. The air here carried the combined scents of all the day's blooms, concentrated by the cooling evening. In the center of the meadow stood a single ancient arch formed entirely of intertwined vines, tall enough for the tallest villager and wide enough for two to pass underneath. Ilara stepped through it, and on the other side the world felt somehow quieter, as though the arch marked a threshold where the ordinary gave way to the deeply restorative. Beneath the arch, a wide stone platform waited, covered in the softest moss and scattered with fallen petals. She lay back, arms at her sides, eyes turned toward the emerging stars. The jasmine vine overhead formed a living canopy, its blooms opening further in the darkness to release their richest perfume. Scentlings gathered in small groups along the edges, their fur blending with the petals. Vine weavers settled into their nightly positions, legs folded neatly. Petal whispers found perches in the canopy and began a final evening chorus that rose and fell in perfect time with the breeze. Root whispers arranged themselves in a protective ring around the platform, their small forms creating a living boundary of care. As Ilara rested there, the fragrance settled over her like the lightest quilt, seeping into every tired corner of her body. Her breathing deepened naturally, each inhale drawing in calm, each exhale releasing the last traces of the day's concerns. The distant shape of the hills remained visible against the night sky. The sleepy giants form a constant, benevolent outline that promised the land itself rested too. Time lost its sharp edges here, stretching into comfortable expanses where minutes felt like hours and hours felt like moments of pure presence. The scentlings began to move in slow circles, their paws creating the faintest patter against the leaves, a sound that blended with the petal whisper's notes into a natural melody designed for rest. Ilara's eyelids grew pleasantly heavy, yet she remained aware enough to notice how the moss beneath her molded perfectly to her back, supporting every curve without effort. The jasmine vine above seemed to adjust its leaves ever so slightly, creating small pockets of shade that protected her face from any stray breeze. A single root whisper climbed onto the platform and tucked a fallen petal beneath her hand, a tiny gesture that carried the weight of centuries of quiet kindness. From this resting place, the entire tour of the walls revealed its purpose. Each section had offered its own gift. The thick growth at the beginning had grounded her. The eastern arches had lifted her gaze. The fountain had refreshed her senses. The courtyard swing had restored motion without hurry. And now this meadow arch completed the circle, by inviting complete surrender to stillness. The vines had not spoken in words, yet their presence affirmed everything needed. That rest belonged to her, and that her thoughts deserved space to settle, and that the world held places where weariness transformed into renewal without struggle. Hours passed in this way, or perhaps only minutes. The distinction no longer mattered. When Alara finally rose, the stars had wheeled across the sky, and the village lights glowed softly in the distance. She retraced her steps along the path, but now each section felt familiar in a new way, like greeting old friends who had shared their secrets. The scentlings accompanied her for part of the return, scampering along the vines at shoulder height. The petal whispers sang a farewell from the fountain. The root whispers waved from their stations. At the village gate, she paused once more, turning to look back at the walls, where the jasmine vine continued its endless draping, steady and generous. Back in her own cottage, Alara prepared for sleep with movements that flowed without resistance. The fragrance from her clothes and hair lingered, a personal reminder of the evening's journey. She slipped beneath her quilt, the same one that had waited patiently all day, and closed her eyes. Outside, the walls stood grand, the climbers holding their blooms open through the night, releasing their scent into the darkness, so that anyone who stepped outside would receive the same comfort. The sleepy giant silhouette in the hills remained, a silent guardian whose ancient rest now lived within every leaf and petal. In the days that followed, others in Snuggleton noticed a new lightness in Alara's step, and a deeper kindness in her eyes. She never spoke of the tour in detail, yet those who followed the same path along the walls later reported similar experiences of thoughts untangling and bodies growing heavy with welcome tiredness. The jasmine vine continued its quiet work, draping over stone after stone, season after season, its fragrance carrying the same message to every passer-by. Here is a place where the heart can lay down its burdens, where the breath can find its natural rhythm, and where the land itself offers an embrace that never asks for anything in return. The meadow arch waited for the next visitor. Its canopy of vines swaying in the night breeze with a rhythm as old as the hills. Scentlings curled into their nests among the leaves. Vine weavers tucked their legs beneath them. Petal whispers tucked heads under wings, and root whispers settled into the soil. The silver stream kept its low melody. The stars kept their steady watch, and the entire garden existed in perfect balance, ready to welcome anyone whose steps led them towards its walls. Ilara drifted into sleep, with the memory of the canopy above her and the moss beneath, her body remembering the exact way the swing had moved and the fountain had sung. In her dreams, she walked the path again, but this time every creature joined her in a slow procession. Their combined presence creating a living affirmation that echoed through the night. You are held. You are enough. You may rest now. The jasmine vine wove through all of it, connecting stone to stone, moment to moment, breath to breath, until the boundary between the garden and the dreamer blurred into one continuous field of peace. And so the walls of Snuggleton stood through every night and every day. Their scented climbers offering the same invitation they had extended since the sleepy giant first paused among them. The path remained open. The benches waited. The creatures continued their gentle work, and the fragrance drifted on the air like a promise kept across generations. Whoever chose to follow that path would find, as Ilara had, that the journey around the garden was never truly a journey away from home, but a return to the deepest, most natural state of being, where tiredness became the doorway to restoration, and every breath carried the quiet certainty that all was well.